I got something to tell y'all that you're just not gonna like. So here it is. Warren Buffett's returns might not be as good as we thought.
No. Yeah. Are you serious?
I know. It sounds like sacrilege, but you gotta hear me out. Today, at long last, we're going to review the 1956 to 1969 Buffett Partnership letters to see how the Oracle of Omaha himself calculated and communicated performances back in his day. Then we can see how the best of the best did it, if there are any errors, and how we can improve upon how you calculate and communicate performances as the next generation of investors. Spoiler alert, there are issues. Now, if you haven't read the full Buffett Partnership letters yet, I highly recommend you do so. In the description, I included a link where you can find each of those letters. And as an added bonus and completely unrelated, I also found some of the earlier writings of other legendary value investors, Norbert Liu of Punch Card Capital, Manish Brai of Pabrai Investments, Michael Burry of Scion Asset Management, all for the one-time low cost of free. Make sure you check them out. Reading the earlier writings of the greatest investors, or even up-and-coming ones, is such a valuable use of our time because we get to see how these investors grew into who they are today, how they think about stocks and investing, and how even the greatest can make mistakes.
The original purchase of Berkshire was a terrible mistake, and my mistake. No one pushed me into it.
But before you start reading investor letters, it really helps to understand how to evaluate performances. Because I've read numerous letters in my day, and unfortunately not all of them do a good job at that. I've even seen ones that are unintentionally wrong or misleading. But enough teasing, let's dive in.
Go for it.
Actually, hold up. There are actually many different types of performances, and it really helps to know which one or ones we want to see before we start reading these letters. So I came up with the 3 most likely performances we'll want to see while reading these investor letters. The first performance is what we're going to call Buffett's entrepreneurial return. The entrepreneurial return is the rate of return Buffett receives for setting up and maintaining the business of investing for other people. In essence, if you as the reader were curious about setting up your own fund and wanted to know what rate of return to expect given the profit and the cost that Buffett provides, this is the performance you would use. Comparing entrepreneurial returns will tell you what's the most profitable business venture. The next performance is Buffett's investment performance. This is the rate of return that Buffett receives for investing in securities after you subtract all the costs of investments, such as transaction fees. Comparing the investment performance across different managers will tell you who is the better investor. The final metric that's going to interest us is the client's performance. Unfortunately for the investors, Warren Buffett and the managers don't work for free. So instead of taking home an investment return, they're going to take home the investment return minus the fee that they charge, which we'll call the client's performance. And this is really important because you can have the world's greatest manager, and in this case they did. But if they're making 100% gains, for example, but the fee is 99% and you're only taking home 1%, then what's the point of having the world's greatest manager, right? And this is the return I would most likely expect to see on investor letters because this is the one that the clients really need to see. This is the one they're looking for. And when you compare client returns across funds, you get to find out the venture that's going to be the most profitable. To recap, we have the entrepreneurial performance, the investment performance, and the client's performance. So now let's take a look at the Buffett Partnership letters to see if any of these performances are communicated, and if they are, how they can be improved upon. Now let's dive in.
Go for it.
Early on, the only type of performance that Buffett provides is his average investment performance, which, like we said earlier, isn't actually the return that the limited partners receive because it doesn't account for that management fee. And the reason why Buffett says that he did this is because he was managing multiple partnerships at the time with different fee structures. So he thought it would be best to provide an overall return. Was it a good solution though? No. Just like Buffett said, the clients are most interested in the client performance because that's how well they did. Obviously, right? The best solution in this case would have been to break down the client performances based on the partnership they're in. Admittedly, this is pretty tough for an investment manager to do because it's going to reveal that not all partnerships were treated exactly equally. But that's just the nature of the business, and it really can't be helped. Ultimately, though, the best solution is just the most transparent one. Here's what makes Buffett so remarkable, though. In 1962, Buffett wanted to combine all the partnerships into one under one fee structure. And in a demonstration of the utmost integrity, he took the interest provision that was the most fair to investors and combined it with a carried interest that was the most favorable to investors to create the famous fee structure that Manish Pabrai is known for copying to this day. If you don't know what those terms mean, don't worry about it. We'll actually talk about it later in the video. What's important to know right now is that after Buffett combined all the partnerships into one, he changed the way he communicated performances. Pro forma, Buffett started sharing not only the investment performance, but also the client performance, which is exactly what we'd hope to see. However, throughout all these letters, we never actually get to see the first performance metric we talked about in this video, the entrepreneurial performance. Which means for those future or current managers out there, one way that you can improve upon Buffett's legacy would to be providing the entrepreneurial performance in your letters. But that's not the only way you can improve upon his legacy. When we read performances, knowing what's being communicated is only half the battle. The other half is knowing how it's calculated. And this is where things get interesting. First, let's look at Buffett's February 1960 letter. He writes, "The overall net gain is determined on the basis of market values at the beginning and end of the year, adjusted for payments made to partners or contributions received from them. What's illuminating is when you ask yourself, how are payments and contributions adjusted?" In the January 1962 letter, Buffett provides this appendix, which breaks down each partnership and how he arrives at his average investment return of 45.9%. At the bottom here, you'll see partnerships he excluded from the average because the partnership started in 1961 and hadn't had enough time to make a meaningful inference on his return. That part's actually okay. What's troublesome is this note right here that gave him away. The Buffett TD partnership contributed money in 1961 twice during the year, very likely by a letter of intent or a special agreement, which allows people to invest in a fund below the minimum if they agree to get to the minimum within a certain period of time. Using his percentage gain and the contribution history, we can see exactly how cash flows are adjusted. In this Excel sheet, I found out that Buffett's 28.1% return is what's called total return. And it's what you get when you take the total gains and divide it by the total contribution. And this is a problem because it typically ignores the time value of money as it does here. And if you want more details on why that is, you can check out our previous video on our review of the Popular Investors Portfolio Update, which I have linked in the description. But instead of total return, we must use the internal rate of return, or IRR for short. On the left-hand side of this Excel sheet, I did the math and found out that Buffett's return is actually 29.95%, but that's only after adjusting for contributions. What about payments? To understand how payments affect Buffett's returns, we have to understand how the fee structure works, which is comprised of two components, the hurdle rate and carried interest. According to the partnership agreements, the first 6% that Buffett makes in his investment returns, 100% of that goes to the clients. That's the hurdle Buffett has to reach before he gets paid through carried interest. This hurdle rate has to be paid out to investors in the form of monthly payments based on 6% of the balance at the start of the year. These monthly payments are going to thwart the use of total return because total return assumes that all the payments were done at one time, which isn't actually what happened, as you'll see in our Excel sheet in a second. Then there's carried interest. After the portfolio makes more than 6% in the year, Buffett gets to split those profits with the investors. The clients are going to take home 75% of the profits, while Buffett's going to take 25%. Whereas logically it makes sense to pay it out at the end of the year when you know how the portfolio performed, total return is apparently psychic because it assumes that the payments are done at the very beginning, which, as you and I know, that's totally different. So let's dive into Excel to show you how different that is. Here, Scott's providing the January 1962 Buffett Partnership Letter, where Buffett provides the 1957 performance on a pre-fee and after-fee basis. At the top, we have the pre-fee 10.4%, and at the bottom, we have the after-fee 9.3%. So now in Excel, I'm going to show you how he calculates it, why it's wrong, and what we should use instead. So in this Excel sheet, which is linked in the description below, the top left-hand side has a fee structure table, which provides the 6% hurdle rate and the 75-25% carried interest split. To give you an example of how that works, imagine the portfolio made 7% in a year. Well, the first 6% is going to go to the client, but the remaining 1% is going to be split up. 75% of the gains is going to be made to the client and 25% is Buffett's take home. That's how he makes money. To give you a sense of how Buffett calculates the return based on the fee structure, let's imagine we put $100 into the portfolio on January 1st, 2021. Well, according to the partnership letter, the ending balance after 1 year on a pre-fee basis is $110.40, and after fees, it's going to be $109.30. We're actually going to ignore the pre-fee because that's not actually what we care about. And we don't actually want to give that to the client because the client's really concerned with how it personally affected them, the after-fee basis. So using this information, how do we figure out the 9.3% return? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You take the $9.30 gain divided by the $100 starting balance and you get 9.3%. Notice that there's no timeline here. It doesn't matter when we paid out the hurdle rate or when we paid out the carried interest. But as you and I both know, there's a time value of money, and it absolutely matters when you pay these out. So instead of using this method called total return, what we want to do instead is use the internal rate of return, which adjusts for the time value of money, which is what I did over here. So instead what we have to do is create a timeline of events. On January 1st, 2021, we put $100 in the portfolio, and every single month we're receiving that hurdle rate payment. And to get 50 cents is actually pretty simple. All you do is you take the 6% annual interest rate, divide it by 12 to get the monthly rate, and multiply it by the beginning balance. That's how it works. And every single month, 50 cents is paid out until the very end when we know how Buffett performed overall, and then we can pay the carried interest. So what happens is this $100 gains and gains and gains and gains. Meanwhile, every single month we're paying it out, and at the very end we're going to get a balance that's greater than $103.30. But then Buffett takes his cut and we're left with $103.30. Notice it's different than $109.30, and that's because this includes withdrawals, which means if you add up all these 50-cent withdrawals, you're going to get $6, which is the difference between this and this. So when we use the internal rate of return, what we actually find out is Buffett's performance is much closer to 9.5% than it is to 9.33%. This is the actual performance. He actually did better than he thought. To make matters worse, Buffett only allowed deposits and withdrawals on January 10th and January 5th, respectively, to avoid unnecessary complexity, paperwork, and headache. Ironically, it actually gives us more of a headache because unless everything is done on January 1st, which is impossible by the way, it messes up total return. Some of you might have picked up on the fact that Buffett's returns throughout this entire video have been more conservative than the returns we found using the appropriate method. Unfortunately though, that's not always the case for reasons that we uncovered in our review of the Popular Investors portfolio updates. However, Buffett's an extremely rare case where his returns throughout the entire length of the partnership are actually more conservative than the returns we find using the appropriate method. But that's an extremely rare case. To wrap up everything nicely, Buffett's historical returns have been nothing short of remarkable. In fact, they might actually have been better than we originally thought. However, the way he calculated and communicated performances is definitely something that we can improve upon. For those future generation of investors out there, I hope we take this as a moment to not only read and reread these partnership letters, but to think about Buffett's legacy and how it can be improved upon. There are also moments in the Buffett partnership letters where Buffett talked about calculating and communicated performances that I just didn't get to talk about in this video, but perhaps we'll save for a future date. Always be sure to fact check my math because I've been known to be wrong in the past, and I'm definitely sure I will be wrong at some point in the future. But thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a comment down below thanking Scott for all the hard work he did editing this beast of a video. But until next time. For anyone curious, Buffett has since changed the way he communicates performances. This is the table Buffett provides every single year in his shareholder letters. What he does is he takes the 1-year performance of investing in Berkshire Hathaway on an after-tax basis and compares it to the pre-tax return of the S&P 500 in that same time frame. This is the gold standard to how returns should be communicated. Because you made it to the very, very end of this video, I saved the best bonus content for you, I promise. So recently, Chamath Palihapitiya, a fund manager, communicated his annual performance on Twitter, to which another fund manager, Christopher Bloomstrand, lashed out and exposed the funky method that Chamath was using. And whereas I agree with a great many of Christopher Bloomstrand's points, he did actually make a couple of errors, citing the Buffett Partnership letter performances and how it was calculated and communicated. So after watching this entire video to completion, I hope you check out the Twitter feud, which I have linked in the description below, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section. So this is now the very end. Thanks for watching, and Explosion out.